Russell, you can begin.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with everyone about this last legislative session. The 83rd legislature was looked ahead to as being a challenging one at best. In fact, in our early discussions leading up to it, there was pretty much a consensus that passing any legislation related to renewable energy was fairly doubtful. And we looked at the session as being one where we would have to defend our existing opportunities and advantages that we have through law in the state, to retain our supportive laws, and if we were successful in doing that, then we would have a success. We looked at the elections leading up to it, and there's no other way to describe it other than the fact that a shift in the politics in the state continued further to the right. The Tea Party was very active. That in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing from a renewable energy standpoint, but the particular flavor in the state did tend to lean in the direction of those who were winning these elections around the state being unfavorable in their thinking about renewables, primarily because of its tie to government involvement. And I'm pleased to say that thanks in large part to the work of a number of people within the organization and our allies and many other organizations with similar ideas and approaches, we were more successful than expected. Particularly would like to point out that Clay Butler, our policy committee chair, leading up to and through the legislative session with the Butler firm, was very effective. Susan Ross, our legislative consultant, and the board members and subcommittee chairs of our policy committee, and at various times individual members, all contributed as well to what turned out to be somewhat successful compared to what we expected. The session was its usual massive undertaking. Several thousand bills were filed. We perused all of those bills, and out of everything that was filed, settled on 106 bills that we would either support, oppose, or monitor closely in case they became a problem or looked like they would offer an advantage, and also because they were of some interest to us, regardless of what happened to them. Out of those, 50 initially received official TREIA support, and ultimately we ended up with 46 bills that we supported throughout. There was some shifting going on throughout the session. Out of those bills, 5 of them passed. Only 4 of them passed out of committee other than the 5 that passed ultimately. 1 of those passed the full Senate plus a House committee. So you can see that a very small number, other than the 5 that actually ultimately passed, made very much progress. 12 were heard in committee and left pending, and 24 received no hearing at all. We also officially opposed 5 bills, and I'm pleased to say that all 5 of those were defeated. We monitored an additional 55, and out of those 55, 9 of those passed, and 46 of those failed. Out of the bills that were monitored and passed, 9 of those passed. Out of those, 4 of those were of interest to us, especially. And I'm listing those as you see on your screen. House Bill 35, which was homeowner association and property owner associations may not prohibit homeowners' use of adjacent lot for residential purposes. Without going into a great deal of detail, this might be of interest to solar installers at some point along the line. It was not aimed at or did not have any particular reference to solar, but one that we need to keep an eye on because it does impact how things are done around a residence. House Bill 1223, tax refunds on equipment purchases to manage and operate data centers. This included a tax break for the purchase and installation of certain electric equipment and cooling equipment. So there could be an opportunity there to be exploited, worth looking at more closely. Senate Bill 700, state agencies and institutions of higher education have to set a percentage goal for reducing electric consumption and produce a plan to do that. And in the Senate Bill 902, certain water districts have to study their electric consumption and implement a plan to reduce. Again, there may be some opportunity to take advantage of that. The bills that we opposed and fixed, House Bill 1490 was the only one that we had a major issue with that we had the opportunity to change. And essentially what we had to do there is defend the definition of renewable energy. The municipal solid waste industry historically has tried to claim itself as being renewable, but utilizing municipal solid waste in the aggregate incorporates many non-renewable elements, and so we were successful in getting the language changed in that bill so that there was no confusion as there was initially in the wording. Of the bills that we opposed, we defeated the 5 that we were most concerned about. House Bill 538, which was a massive tax exemption repeal bill that went after pretty much every tax exemption known in our state laws. And for the first time, this same type of bill, which has been filed before, included the property tax exemption that we enjoy, the franchise tax exemption, and the fuel use tax exemption for renewables. We were successful in retaining those. House Bill 605 made it more difficult to site wind plants near airports and extended by a 25-mile radius the influence of a municipality on their extraterritorial jurisdiction for what happens with the installation of wind turbines. That would have been very difficult for the industry. It was also defeated. House Bill 2026 was the repeal of the state's goal for renewable energy. There was a full-blown effort to do exactly that, including the CREZ lines, which were and are well underway and almost completed now, to take funding and support away from that. That was also defeated. Additional bills, House Bill 2338. This one was a special concern because it took the Homeowners Association law, which we were successful with last session, and worsened the situation for solar considerably. As you see listed there are several things that it would have done would not have been helpful, to say the least. That was successfully defeated. House Bill 2695, which allowed municipalities to regulate wind turbines, also in extraterritorial jurisdiction. Another similar bill to one earlier defeated. That one was also defeated. The bills that we supported and passed are the ones we're most excited about. Senate Bill 385, property assessed clean energy. House Bill 2500, appraisal of solar energy properties. House Bill 3390, Chapter 313, economic development issues, and House Bill 2712, the ad valorem tax exemption for energy storage systems, and House Bill 1864, which required the consideration of combined heat and power for certain governmental facilities. We're not going to talk about House Bill 1864 since it has no relation to the primary focus of this discussion, which is solar. So, in addition to that, bills that we supported that didn't pass, the ones that went the farthest are Senate Bill 1239, which passed the committee. This had to do with fair market value for distributed renewable generation in the purchase of surplus electricity. It was a very heavily supported bill by the industry, but had many complications, including the fact that it required things from the co-ops and munis which they simply would not and were not going to accept, and they were very successful in shutting that down. Senate Bill 1478, this one passed its first committee on the Senate side, and was a special bill for El Paso Electric, indicating that it had to purchase 50% of required renewable energy credits from their Texas service territory. There were some complications with that bill that we were not able to overcome. Senate Bill 1551, this one passed the full Senate and passed the House committee that it was sent to. This was the distributed renewable generation in colonias in the Rio Grande Valley. Had a lot of local support, but just didn't make it to the finish line. So let's get into the bills that passed. This is the most important thing. House Bill 385, I believe, was the bill that we were most engaged with or supportive of that was successfully passed. And going into some detail on it, look at the key definitions for PACE in that bill. What is a qualified improvement? Now, PACE funding under Senate Bill 385 is restricted to qualified improvements, and this is where we had a lot of controversy. In fact, the bill initially had the term renewable energy in it in 3 places, including the definition of renewable energy, to make sure that there was no question that it was covered. In order to get it out of committee and get it passed, we had to give up renewable energy as a term completely in the bill. But we're successful in negotiating language in what is a qualified improvement in such a manner that renewable energy is clearly covered. As you see there in the definition, we made sure that the qualified improvement is intended to decrease water or energy consumption or demand. Demand was not in there initially, even in our first efforts to try to get a definition that covered renewables. And it was important to point out that this isn't just about consumption, because you put an installation of renewable energy on the structure and you're still consuming energy. It doesn't necessarily reduce consumption. We were concerned that that could be used against renewables, so getting demand in there was important. And also further down in the definition, getting the words thermal energy inserted in there opened up the opportunity for solar hot water, which would possibly otherwise not have gotten the recognition it needed. And then the definition of what is real property: privately owned commercial or industrial real property. So this PACE bill is focused on commercial and industrial, but we further got in the definition residential real property with 5 or more dwelling units. So there's an opportunity for these larger multifamily dwelling structures. Exclusions: some property and projects are specifically excluded from eligibility. Undeveloped lots undergoing development at the time of the assessment, the purchase or installation of products or devices not permanently fixed to real property. So those 2 things are proscribed. Eligibility for financing: you're going to have written contracts between the property owner and the local government entity to finance the project. Financing can be provided by a third party or by the local government. So there was concern that it would just be like it is in some places, the local government entity issuing bonds. This brings in the private financial community in a way that I think is going to be very helpful. If it is done by a third party, the local government still must enter into a written contract with that third party financier. And in addition, the period of the property assessments made under the bill may not exceed the useful life of the qualified project that is the basis for the assessment. And of course, that makes a lot of sense. And the financing for which assessments are imposed may include any number of items: the cost of materials and labor necessary for installation or modification of a qualified improvement, and a wide range of types of fees, including such things as permit fees, inspection fees, lender's fees, program application administrative fees, project development and engineering fees, third-party review fees, including verification review fees, and any other fees or costs that may be incurred by the property owner incident to the installation, modification, or improvement on a specific or pro rata basis as determined by the local government. So there's a lot that can be included in the financing. The financing requirements: a mortgage lien holder for the property has to be notified in writing and has to give consent before the financing can be done. But in the case of commercial and industrial, there often are not lien holders. Record keeping: local governments are required to file written notice of each contractual assessment in the real property records of the county. And that's an obvious one. The lien status: assessments made under this chapter are considered a first and prior lien against the real property. This is the issue which made it difficult for the earlier PACE bill, which was passed in the state, that was focused on residential, for the reasons that many of you involved in this for a time and understanding the history of PACE know full well, with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's concerns about this prior lien against the property. Local governments may contract with other taxing units to perform the duties related to collection or assessments. They can issue bonds, of course, for the financing purposes. And as far as prohibitions go, local governments may not make the issuance of a permit, license, or other authorization from the local government contingent on participation in a PACE finance program, or otherwise compel a property owner to use PACE financing for a qualified project. This was a major issue, and this reflects a lot of the concern about government involvement. I don't know how this is going to affect things. I don't think it's going to be a major issue for anybody, and so it was accepted. Wasn't part of the original bill. To establish the program, local governments must determine that a program is convenient and necessary, designate a region or regions within the local government's jurisdiction in which the program will operate. So it could be anything from a small area of a major city to the full city, to a county, and to actually, as it turns out, a broad region. You have to prepare a detailed report describing what the program will be, adopt a resolution of intent to establish the program, including an announcement of a public hearing and the availability of a detailed report, so public disclosure, hold a public hearing at which the public may comment on the proposed program and required report, and adopt a resolution establishing the program and its terms. All of those things would seem fairly obvious on the surface. And then finally, as I said, 2 or more local governments are authorized to administer a program jointly. So this opens up the possibility for a corridor type of program. And there's a lot of reason to hope that we will see these types of agreements entered into, because there will be more consistency across a larger area as our companies attempt to figure out how to work their way through the process. Each proposed project is required to provide a review by an independent third party of the water or energy baseline conditions and the projected water or energy savings expected. And once a project is completed, the local government must obtain verification that the project was properly completed and is operating as intended. Participating property owners may purchase directly the equipment and materials necessary for the qualified improvement, or may contract directly, including through lease, power purchase agreements, or other service contracts for the installation or modification of a qualified improvement. This is a very important part of the law for the solar industry, and we were happy to have been able to help see to it that that was included. Moving on to the next bill, House Bill 2500, which was the Solar Energy Property Tax Appraisal Bill. This has to do with large-scale, utility-scale, or commercial-scale properties. And the definition that's included in that bill of a solar energy property is a newly defined term in Texas law, and it's intended to distinguish itself from the context of the term solar energy device as found in the tax code section 1127 that currently exists for a solar energy device for a property tax exemption, which has been in place since the mid-1980s. That definition refers to solar energy installations on the customer side of the meter where the energy is used primarily on site. So the existing property tax exemption for a solar energy device is restricted to non-utility scale types of installations. Solar energy property, as you see defined there, and let me just skip down to a further explanation of that 11.27 definition of solar energy device. That definition in 1127 is for solar and wind-powered energy devices, so it's broader. And what they did is they extracted from that definition the same basic definition, but left out the parts about wind and other resources. So in any case, the point is that this is for application to commercial and utility scale installations. What it does is it adopts a approach for appraisers appraising properties for those types of installations, and they have to use a particular type of approach for doing their assessment. They're removing the ambiguity that currently exists for those types of projects for ad valorem tax appraisal, and indicating that they have to use the cost method. And we'll get to that in a minute. This law enables appraisers to take into account rapidly occurring technological changes in the solar industry. It does not create new incentives or abatements. It does not affect any currently existing incentives or abatements. So it's very targeted. In determining the market value of the solar energy property under this law, an appraiser must use the cost method, use cost data obtained from generally accepted sources, make an appropriate adjustment for physical, functional, or economic obsolescence, calculate the property's depreciated value using a maximum useful life of 10 years. This is where the removal of the uncertainty comes in, or the ambiguity. And an appraiser may not determine the depreciated value to be less than 20% of the value determined using the above method. It is hoped and expected that with this law in place, doing utility scale installations in the state will be smoother and considered more viable. And I believe that to be the case from visiting with some of the companies that are hoping to do this, and we'll see how that pans out. House Bill 3390 was a massive bill. This is one which was of great concern going in to the session because there was a full-blown effort to eliminate this program. This particular program has been perhaps the most successful economic development program that involved renewable energy, although it wasn't specified for it. Any number of types of industries could take advantage of it, that the state has undertaken. And it's been controversial for several years. Our objective was to do what we could to see to it that, number one, the program was not eliminated. And secondly, that some of the negative things we'd been hearing before the session that were going to be proposed were not successful. and that the basis of the program was retained. It was scheduled to expire on the 31st of December in 2014. So if something was not approved, it would have gone away on its own, and we didn't want to see that happen either. A number of related bills were filed. In fact, I think there were 5 or 6. Some of them worse than others, and ultimately the effort to eliminate the program failed. Efforts to remove renewable energy electric generation were undertaken as one of the eligible properties, and that also failed. And elements of all of these various bills found their way into ultimately House Bill 3390, which was refined and ultimately passed and becomes effective January 1st of 2014. And importantly, the program was extended for 8 years through 2022. The time elements in the bill were extended. The program, in addition to being extended for 8 years through 2022, the term of limitation agreements was lengthened from 8 years to 10 years, and property owners' viable presence requirement that was in the law was extended from 3 years to 5 years. So you got to stick around for a while if you're going to take advantage of this program. The whole concept of granting these abatements being controversial, you would expect that those who take advantage of it would be there for a while. So it's not that terrible a thing, I don't think, that it was expanded to 5 years. It is a little bit more stringent. Another major concern going in was that the local control of these programs would be taken away from the local school districts and put in the hands of the state. And in an atmosphere in which there had been significant anti-renewable energy feelings expressed, that would not have been a good outcome. In the bill itself, the legislative intent clause in the bill says that keeping ultimate control of economic development related property tax decisions should be at the local level. And of course, that was what we were hoping for. I think there's some ambiguity in the law, which I'll mention a little bit later. School districts have to request a third-party economic impact evaluation if they're going to pursue somebody's proposal toward final approval. The comptroller, though, determines what information will be included in the evaluation, so a significant amount of control exists there. The comptroller must determine that the project will result in economic impacts on the state within 25 years sufficient to offset certain tax revenue lost to the school district before they can approve moving forward with it. Comptroller also must determine that receiving limitation on appraised value is a determining factor in the project locating in Texas. There was a lot of controversy as to whether or not many of these large wind projects, which are historically have taken major advantage of this program, would have come anyway. And yet we did not want to see that changed significantly because we believe it is a major factor. And for solar projects coming down the line, we really think it would have a major impact. The comptroller also had to determine whether to issue a certificate for limitation on appraised value. So the comptroller's office makes that determination based on the things that we just mentioned. The comptroller's office may issue the certificate if requirements are not met, if it determines that other benefits justify. So there's an out for the comptroller to go ahead and make that determination to issue a certificate regardless. Now, with changes coming up in the comptroller's office, the comptroller that has been in place for several years has announced that she will not be running again, so we don't know who that will be. having this control at the comptroller's office is a dicey deal. A school district may choose not to approve an application regardless of what the comptroller does. So if they have had a proposal submitted to them and they've decided that they don't like it, no matter what the comptroller comes up with saying this is a good project, they can refuse to approve the application. But a school district may not approve an application if the comptroller does not issue a certificate. So it seems to me that there is an ambiguity in the law when it comes to control over this. The school district, which according to the initial part of the bill, which says that control of these tax-related issues should remain in the hands of the local school district, I think is somewhat compromised by that fact. We'll have to see how that plays out legally, and some disagree. They say that's just a matter of interpretation, and there really is no ambiguity. All the control remains with the school district. The job creation requirements were tightened in some places and loosened in others. A qualifying job, when it comes to the job creation requirements, still must be a permanent full-time job with certain health benefits and so forth. It must pay at least 110% of the county manufacturing job average weekly wage, but not the county average weekly wage for all jobs for property owners creating over 1,000 jobs as it existed before. So that was taken away. The number of jobs that must be created is still 25, but there is a provision, or was a provision, allowing 20% of those jobs to be non-qualifying jobs, and that was removed. So all 25 must be qualifying. The average weekly wage for non-qualifying jobs must now be greater than the county's average weekly wage. And the issue of supplemental payments was addressed, also a very hot-button issue. Very complicated. Won't go into the details of the changes that have been made over the years. When the wind projects early on were providing huge amounts of supplemental payments, much to the happiness of the school districts. That was cut back considerably in the last couple of legislative sessions, and with the exception of certain special circumstances, supplemental payments by applicants for these limitations, and also now any other entity on behalf of the district is modified. Instead of the previous $100 per student per year, the new law allows the greater of $100 per student per year, or $50,000 per year. So our fears about that being taken away completely did not come to pass. The minimum qualified investment amount remains the same as before, but the penalties for failing to meet the minimum qualified investment also remain, and the comptroller may now grant a waiver of penalties under certain circumstances. And I have to say that the penalties section of this law was expanded considerably. It's several pages of length, so they're very concerned about everybody living up to the requirements. And then finally, the minimum amount of the limitation that can be offered was modified somewhat, as you see listed below. And those are the numbers. The final bill, House Bill 2712, was an ad valorem tax exemption for energy storage systems. This is very important to the solar industry as well as the wind industry. And you see the definition for what is an energy storage system. It covers more than just a battery or whatever, but the elements that are needed to make it function properly. And also there's some room in there for pretty much every kind of storage that you can think of. One can take the exemption for this tax abatement if the system that you're going to install is to be used, constructed, acquired, or installed wholly or partly to meet or exceed local, state, or federal rules for monitoring, control, or reduction of air pollution. So it's tied to the EPA Federal Clean Air Act, and is restricted to be located in a non-attainment area under that law. It also has to be located in a municipality with a population of at least 100,000, adjacent to a municipality with a population of more than 2 million, and have a capacity of at least 10 megawatts, and be installed on or after January the 1st of 2014. Basically what this means is that it was a bracketed bill, which means it was targeted to a particular area and probably for a particular project. In fact, it's widely known what that project is and where it will be located. And of course, granting this tax exemption is done by the county commissioners in the county, the chief appraiser, and the appraisal district, and they're responsible for it, or the school district where the project is located, and its governing board. The statute provides for a school district to be fully reimbursed by the state of Texas for the income the district would otherwise have gained from the tax project. The statute does not allow for a municipality or county to recover the tax abatement directly from the state, as schools can do, but a case can be made that such projects bring economic development through job creation and local spending, so they are recouped in that way. In addition, they get the benefit of the mitigation of the cost of poor air quality that would exist in the area were the system not installed. And finally, House Bill 2712 has no term limit for granting the tax exemption, which means that they could continue to grant it for the life of the system, which could be 25 years or more. In the case of a storage project, for instance, coupled with a solar installation or a unit. But the taxing local authority can revoke the exemption at any time for the upcoming year. And once the exemption has been granted, unless it's revoked, as I read the law, it does not need to be reapplied for on an annual basis. So those are the bills which passed that we're pleased that we saw success in. All of those bills have some implications, opportunities, and advantages, we believe, for the solar sector, and affects every size of type of installation from distributed through utility scale. Well, that concludes my presentation, and I'm now open for any questions.
Thank you, Russell, for this great overview of everything that went on in Texas legislature. I have several questions that have come in, but just a reminder for those in the audience, you can chat your questions. Please send them to all panelists in your send to box in your chat window, or you can send comments to all participants for the entire audience. The first question I had, Russell, was the bill that you had just mentioned about the tax exemption. You said that it was a bracketed bill that was probably intended for a specific project. Do you know what that project was that the 10 megawatt exemption was intended for?
I believe I do, but it's not officially announced as far as I know at this point in time, and I would not want to be the one to claim that is a specific company or project, although I will say that my understanding is it is a compressed air project. And it is to be located on the outskirts of Houston.
Okay, thank you. The first question from our audience is related to the PACE bill. The question was relating to programs like the CPS FIT, the feed-in tariff in San Antonio. And Michael asked, he said, because the energy was feeding in to the grid, it was not all being consumed on site. The property tax exemption was denied, and so Michael asked if there was any attempt to include solar energy equipment that is designed to not be 100% consumed on site, to be fed back to the grid. If there's any attempt to include that equipment as tax exempt.
No. The answer is no. There are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is that the opportunity to gain property tax on the part of the local taxing authority for these larger projects is one of the perks or one of the plums that helps them make the decision to give an abatement for the larger projects under Chapter 313.
All right.
But that answers the question.
Just not the answer he was probably looking for. But thank you.
I'd be glad to visit in greater detail about that one-on-one if somebody would like to contact me on it.
Okay, and so for Michael, there's Russell's emails on the screen if you have more questions. The next question was from Dharma. Pace availability appears to be limited to multi-unit residences. I believe you said it was 5 units or more. Correct. Did we push for pace on individual homes, and do you have any views on what can be done to advance opportunities for individual homes?
We made the decision, working with Keeping Pace in Texas, which was the organization that served as the point unit for this. They had some national support behind them, that because of the circumstance at the national level, it made no sense to try to go in and do anything specifically for residential, since until the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac issue is fixed, it's not likely to have any success in state law. We already have a state PACE law that was aimed at residential that's been ineffective. And rather than muddy the water with residential, when the parties which lined up behind this bill when it was focused on commercial and industrial were not prone to do so if it addressed residential, the decision was made that it was best to focus where there was the real opportunity for success, and to broaden and hopefully create some real near-term opportunity for the industry. So I guess the short answer to that is no, we did not spend a lot of time or effort trying to push further on the residential. That decision was made early on.
Okay, the next question was from Doyle, and thank you for keeping these questions coming in. Will the change in the commercial definition of solar energy device, does that affect any existing residential property tax exemptions as far as the definition of solar energy device?
It should not. As I read the law, the existing law is pretty clear about what actually gets a property tax exemption. And somebody may test all of this in court, because there is the potential for someone to interpret it in a way that creates a conflict. There's no denying that, but I just don't think that's going to be the case. Again, this is something that needs to be looked at and talked about more carefully, and I'd be glad to try to do that one-on-one.
Okay. The next question was from Richard, and it relates to the solar policies that have been recently implemented in Minnesota. I'm not sure how familiar you are with other states, but I'll give you a little background. So the question was, in Texas, can we apply any of the recent solar success in Minnesota policy to help us improve our chances of a solar carve-out in Texas? And then he followed up with the solar carve-out is 1.5%. And there's also requirements that some of this carve-out must be from small solar systems.
Well, let me put it this way: we have had in place, as many of the folks on the call may remember, a 500 megawatt non-wind call it a carve-out if you want, in the existing goal for renewable energy since 2005. And we have tried in every legislative session, we have tried in Public Utility Commission rulemakings aggressively for all this time to have that 500 megawatt non-wind target, as it's called in the law, declared mandatory, and therefore establishing a second tier and have the PUC structure a program. We've had bill after bill trying to do the same thing in various and sundry ways, and this session there was a similar bill, and it got a hearing, and that was it. And this was projected going in because the political situation in Texas right now does not lend itself to that type of program. This is not to say that there isn't reason to continue to look at how can something like that be structured that might be politically viable and continue to push for it. But the approach that we have taken is to try to find places to tweak existing laws and add incremental improvements and opportunities in the competitive market circumstance that we find in 80% of the area of the state, so that all of the pieces that have been developed over the last several years coming together can show a path forward for companies to make doing something in the state viable. And some companies are finding ways to do that. Some of the bills that we just talked about can offer these opportunities. And I just don't see in the near term, unless politics shifts considerably, the likelihood of passing a mandate for a specific technology or approach, such as a carve-out of a certain percent. Again, let me emphasize, this does not mean that we don't think it is worth trying to pursue or continue to look at ways to try to make it happen, but the reality is, as I described it, I believe.
All right. The next question was specific to House Bill 2712. This is a question from Rosina. Can the exemptions be revoked after the investment decision has been made on the energy storage device?
An abatement like this, as I understand it, can be canceled by the local authority. And I'll have to look back at that, but...
And is there any criteria for that cancellation, or is it somewhat arbitrary?
Well, it's, again, the local authority, I think, can, with an announcement in advance of the next year, indicate that it will revoke the exemption. So it is open to that, no question about it. I don't know what the odds of that sort of thing happening are. I'd say they're probably fairly slim, but there's nothing that proscribes that.
Okay. Next question was from Lionel. He asks, he's very curious of what are the state representatives' opinions and perspectives on solar by party and by individual, just in general. Are they pro? Are they neutral? Are they anti? Is there a preference visible by party lines, or is it much more unified across the board?
Very complicated set of political issues to try to explain and discuss when you're looking at 150 representatives and 30 or so senators. There are some, let's put it this way, historically, the bills that have passed in recent years and the portfolio standard that exists and many other positive things that have led to Texas having over 12,000 megawatts of utility scale wind online and 120 plus or minus megawatts of solar installed have happened with both parties being supportive, or the bills would not have passed. In recent years, there has been somewhat of a shift party-wise away from supporting these types of bills. That's obvious. But it's less tied to the issue of renewable energy than it is tied to the role of government. And this particular legislative session may have been a watershed session when it comes to the amount of influence that political position will have in the near-term years ahead. I personally believe that there are many folks on both sides of the aisle who continue to believe that developing renewable energy in Texas is important and that we should do it and that government has a role to play. And as things shift away from the heavy anti-government stance that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years, that's beginning to come back. This legislative session, because we thought it was going to be just totally wasted potentially, being as successful as it was, speaks to that. The PACE bill and the solar tax exemption bill got some support from parties that many people did not expect to see. And on a broader sense, some of the political issues that came up where the Tea Party approach tried to control the day on the floor and ended up losing also speaks to potential direction that we may see in the months and near-term years ahead. The traditional Republican Party in the state has been supportive in the past of renewable energy. The Democrat Party also has been. I think we're headed back in that direction. This is my hope, and I think it's a realistic hope.
All right. Next question, getting back to the electric market, it's from Pam. She asks, why are the munis and co-ops still so reluctant to consider renewable? And that's the municipal-owned electric utilities and the electric cooperatives. So why are they still so reluctant to consider renewable?
Well, I would try to characterize it this way. The municipal utilities are very supportive in many ways of the development of renewable energy. In fact, were it not for the actions of municipal utilities and also some co-ops, and frankly, in the competitive market, some of the transmission and distribution companies that are in that particular realm, there would be much less in the way of solar development in the state. So we cannot characterize municipals and co-ops as being generally difficult. Part of the reason that munis would be is because it's a local control issue, and they take that very seriously. The municipal utilities are not regulated and have never been regulated by the Public Utility Commission, and so this is deeply rooted. If the local politics lead in that direction, the municipal utilities will do the same. And there are several municipal utilities that are instituting solar programs and incentives and building or planning to build larger scale as well for utility generation, and I think others will follow. They simply don't want the legislature or the state telling them what to do. The co-ops are similar, only much more so. They are primarily rural. The policy positions reflect a lot of what I mentioned earlier when it comes to positioning involving government participation in decision-making at local levels. And so you see that reflected. And what we've seen with the co-ops is that, just like with the municipal utility, election of a co-op board is the key to everything. If the folks in the rural areas want to see these sorts of programs, they must elect people to the co-op board that will champion that. That's what happened with the Pedernales Electric Cooperative, the largest electric cooperative in the country, which has shifted in the direction of supportive. It's happened with 2 or 3 other electric co-ops, and the same thing is true of municipal utilities. So I hope that explains partially why there is that attitude, but it has to do with control.
Yes, and to Pam and the audience, I would encourage you, if you're in a muni or a co-op area, to contact your co-op. I'm served by CoServe in the North Dallas area, and the shift that Russell was talking about occurred in our board, and so we now have a $2 per watt rebate for residential solar systems, and it's which is very generous. It's just that co-ops and munis tend to be conservative, so they might not be going as fast as you want. We probably have time for one more question, Russell. There was a question from Arthur about what path forward, feed-in tariff, incentives, could we push our leadership to promote with an idea of emulating successful methodology in other states. But I guess I would, I'll kind of modify this to say, what is your, do you have a #1 solar policy goal for the next session, for the next 2 years? It sounds like PACE was kind of the big success of this past session. Do you have a #1 goal looking forward?
The Texas Renewable Energy Industries Association has a structure to determine exactly that. Our objectives will be the objectives of the industry as they express them and as we hammer them out through a process. We have subcommittees in the policy committee for each of the sectors, including distributed renewable generation, utility scale solar, as well as solar hot water for the 3 related to solar. And there are subcommittees for the other sectors of renewables as well. The process that we go through will be undertaken again, hopefully more intensely than ever, where the participants in those subcommittees will work with their subcommittee chairs and co-chairs to shape what they feel are the #1 major objectives that they would like to achieve, and #2 are politically realistic enough to spend the time pursuing. And that will be fed up through the policy committee process, and we will have opportunities to sit down around the table and explore what we need to do before the next legislative session, which is a 1.5 years away. Now, obviously, we would like to get an earlier start every time to work towards a successful session next time around, and we will try to get that underway sooner rather than later. And let's explore what is viable, what is needed, and what might be actually accomplished.
Okay, so I'll encourage the audience then to join TREIA. You see on the link, www.treia.org, and you can get involved in that process. And Russell, I am going to take one last question that I think will be pretty quick that I saw that was interesting to me. It was on related to your slide 7 about the bill that was defeated. Would it have stopped funding for CREZ and construction immediately and just abandoned all the existing investment for that? That was the understanding of the person that asked this question.
You know, basically that was the intent, was just to, you know, it was, again, the anti-government stance reflected in what I said early on in the conversation that we knew was going to occur. And in bolstering what I said near the end, about seeing a shift going on, that bill or that effort fell flat because, again, there are plenty of people in the legislature and around the state who have seen the benefits of 12,000 plus megawatts of wind and recognize that working toward a similar explosion in the development of solar will bring additional benefits, who had no interest in entertaining what, to many of us, clearly on the surface of it, was a ridiculous proposal in the first place. But it reflected a political stance, and it got slammed.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Russell, for your time today. And we thank the audience for attending. We thank TREIA also for sponsoring this webinar with the Principal Solar Institute. And Russell, if you had any parting words, then we'll sign off now.
Well, I would like to thank everybody for listening and for submitting your questions, and would hope that you will help us move forward by participating in TREIA. All you have to do is go to the website, treia.org, and click on Join TREIA, and all the details are there. The phone numbers are there also if you have questions. It's very important, I believe, for this industry right now to show that we're not going away. In fact, if anything, we're upping the ante and committing ourselves to pushing forward. So please do consider that, and feel free to contact either Scott or myself